Hi again, everyone. Teacher Aulds, i45Now. Thanks for watching here this morning as we address our more issues in our community here through our live town halls. And this one today, talking about the lone finalist selection for superintendent of Clear Creek ISD, the largest district in our coverage area. We are pleased to have with us that lone finalist, Dr. Eric Williams, who was picked just a couple weeks ago to be the lone finalist for superintendent in Clear Creek ISD. The current superintendent, the man that Eric hopes to replace, Dr. Greg Smith with us, and school board president, Dr. Laura DuPont. We did ask that school board member Scott Bowen had joined us today. He had a scheduling conflict and couldn't make it. So we will have the four of y'all here today. So thank y'all all for being part of this today. Also, viewers, if you have questions and want to put those in the comment section, feel free to do so. I can't promise we'll get to all of them, as we had many folks, when they found out we were doing this forum, went ahead and submitted questions to us already ahead of time. So we've got plenty in there, and probably a lot of questions that you'll have to ask as well. So let's get right into it. Dr. Williams, thanks for coming on with us today, and I appreciate your time. First, let's kind of introduce yourself to folks out there. I know you've been you did a little bit with the school board meeting the other night when you were announced as the lone finalist, but also now and did a Q&A with the school district that's on their website on a lot of topics. But I want to give a chance for you to introduce yourself and so that folks can get to know you a little bit.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and your viewers today. So I am incredibly honored to be named as a sole finalist in CCISD. And just to share a little bit of information about me, I was born in Waco, Texas. My dad was in the Air Force, so I moved around a lot growing up as a kid. I was one of 7 kids in a blended family, and we lived in Virginia, Maryland, and Missouri. Lived in England for a few years when I was in preschool. And my wife, Michelle, and I met when we were in college. We have 2 grown kids, a 26-year-old daughter and a 23-year-old son. And when I lived in the St. Louis area, I was inspired to become an educator by Mrs. Green, my 5th grade teacher, and she has had a big influence on me during my career as an educator. So that's a little bit about me and my family.
When you said that Mrs. Green inspired you to be an educator, what was it specifically about that? I think folks are fascinated. What gets a school district leader interested in education in the first place? So
I had studied history before 5th grade, but she had a way of really making it come alive in terms of be really engaging for students. So specifically, we did a series of historical simulations. And so, for example, we had a mock Continental Congress that I remember in particular. And so that really spurred a love of history for me. And I was inspired to want to share that love of history with students. But really, it wasn't just about the content. It was also about connections. And so, interestingly enough, I felt the connection with Mrs. Green through the trash talk that we engaged in around professional football. And I had the opportunity to share with some community members yesterday that we actually placed bets on professional football games 2 times. The first time I won the bet, she had to buy me an ice cream sandwich. It was a very high stakes bet in the school cafeteria. The second time I went to buy her, because I lost, an ice cream sandwich, and she wouldn't let me. And at the time I couldn't understand why, but looking back on it, I can understand that a teacher's not going to let a kid pay off on the bet on professional sports. Long-winded way of saying, she inspired me that as an educator, it's really about connecting with people. And that relationship was a foundation for me, then her sparking a love of history in me. So those 2 things, like this emphasis on engaging learning experiences and connecting with people, those been 2 things that I've taken with me throughout my career.
And engaging is probably the best way we can describe what we're going to be trying to do here today as well. And also joining us is Dr. Laura DuPont. She is the president of the Clear Creek ISD Board of Trustees. Dr. DuPont, what was it about in your mind, in the school board's mind, because it was a unanimous decision, that made Eric Williams stand out when you had more than 85 applicants or so for this position?
So I wanted to make sure from the very beginning to address the process that we went through. And there was a very long line of things where we got information.
If I can hold you up, we are going to address that specifically. That's why I asked the question, then I did. And
Okay.
so not to cut you off there, but I'm going to get into that part a little bit later because it's an important part.
Okay, so I'll get into the top things.
Yeah.
So probably the biggest one was a very mature and deep understanding of school systems, of instructional approaches, of the systematic nature of how you address issues as a leader, what that process is for addressing any issue that comes up before you, any problem that comes up before you. There was also, he had done a lot of homework and already had looked at our strategic plan, had looked at our superintendent targets. That's actually our approach for evaluating the superintendent. And it's also within our district, the way that we align all of the things that happen within the district, the planning that happens and everything else. And so as we asked him some questions about how he approached problems, things he would do in the district, he very fluidly came back to our strategic plans and talked about some of the things that were happening within there and experiences he had with some of those things and how he could bring that into the district, I guess, and help align with us. And then I'll give one other thing, and that was really how we felt that he fit in with our team of 8. Within CCISD, we talk about our 7 trustees and then plus the superintendent, and we are I'm sure you've heard us before, refer to our team of 8. And that's the decision-making process. And we each have different roles in that process. The trustees are the governance, and the superintendent is like the CEO who runs and manages the day-to-day operations. But all of those things only happen successfully as a district if we're working together. And we've worked very hard as a school board ourselves through time for a number of years, going back a while, at least 10 years, to make sure that we do continual learning to understand what our role is, and that relationship with the superintendent is a very strong one, so that in working together, we can all lead the district forward.
And as Dr. Pont talks about the team of 8, and I should point out for those of you just joining us, I know we just started a few minutes ago, this is a I45Now town hall where we talk about issues related to the selection of Dr. Eric Williams as the lone finalist to be superintendent of Clear Creek ISD. And obviously that decision has caused some of a social media uproar. We should point that out, and we're going to address that head on as we go throughout. But talking about the team of 8, the current member, one of those members of the team of 8 is the current CEO and superintendent is Dr. Greg Smith of Clear Creek ISD, who had announced earlier this year he'll be retiring at the end of this year. I noticed though you're not packing up your office yet here, Greg, but as you said, you got some work to do along the lines. First, and I know you and I know each other personally, and we should point out we're good friends. And so I want that up front with everyone that knows here, even though he's an Aggie and I'm a Longhorn. And he and I give each other ribbing all the time. But you've been in this position somewhat, Greg, along the lines, but you had said something to me when you and I were both at the College of the Mainland's League City Education Facility dedication the other day, that if the social media sites had been around like they are now, it may have been a different experience for you. Can you compare the experience you went through when you became superintendent at Clear Creek ISD to what we're seeing with Dr. Williams going through? And by the way, he's not the only one that has something like this. Anytime these decisions come up, you actually brought up kind of an interesting example too. I was wondering if you could share that with us.
Well, I think the onset of the whole social media piece is one in which we have to embrace, but we also know that if you're looking at good research and facts, that may not be the number one site to go to. When I came into Clear Creek ISD, I think I was sitting in the back of the room. I was approved in December of like 2007, and then things just worked one thing after another. We just picked up the baton and left, and I was fortunate enough to follow Dr. Mossman. I was also fortunate enough to have prior experiences in Clear Creek ISD. So being known is one thing. Being unknown is a little bit more challenging, and that people from other states can enter into the fray and the picture. And Dr. Williams is not the first person that's ever had darts thrown at him. He knows as well as I do that as a superintendent, we get way too much credit for when things go right and way too much blame when things go wrong. But we accept the fact that we have to manage when things do go south and be able to correct it in mid-flight.
I also should point out, as you said, you had the experience of coming in. You were a known quantity of coming in, even, Clear Creek ISD, also Albert, you were in the area and speak. And you had relationships with folks in the community already, and that provides an advantage. So Dr. Williams, let me just go with you. Let's go straight into it here. First, let me ask, how tough has it been to see, as Dr. Smith pointed out, the darts thrown at you here as you've gone into this from all directions in many ways?
Well, I understand how incredibly important K-12 education is for children. I mean, children get one shot at K-12 education, and obviously there's nothing more dear to a parent than their children. And so I understand that we live in a time when there's strong diversity of opinions on many issues. And that's certainly the case in Loudoun County, even more so in Loudoun County than in CCISD now, much more so. And so I understand that people are going to have passionate opinions. And I also intellectually recognize that there's a variety of closed small Facebook groups in many communities, including in Loudoun. And so when we posted the news on our website in Loudoun, and when people heard about the announcement here, that led to a small closed Facebook group having an organized effort to post on the CCISD Facebook site. So they encouraged, I'm told they encouraged their members to post and provided that link. And so intellectually, I recognize it, but certainly at the human level, it's not fun. But I will say, though, I'm so impressed with the CCISD community because we had great attendance at the general community forums that we had yesterday. I also had the opportunity to meet with students and with community leader groups. And in every one of those sessions, people came in, they may have came in with questions or concerns, but they were willing to listen. And I'm so appreciative of the positive reception and the number of people that said to me, both publicly in the forum, but also afterwards, that they appreciate the opportunity to hear directly from me about the comments that Loudoun residents had posted on the CCISD Facebook page.
And to give us perspective of because not everyone obviously is going to be familiar with the Loudoun area. It is not far from Washington, D.C. By the way, I've been through there before. It's a beautiful area, Virginia. By the way, I really enjoy it, and I'm curious. For folks that are not familiar, can you describe the community a little bit, and also too, another part, just in community in general, its diversity makeup, its education system, and then also people may not realize the difference between how K through 12 education in Virginia works versus how it works in Texas, because there may be some differences there folks are not familiar with.
So I'll emphasize an observation that you made, and that's that Loudoun County sits just outside DC. Many residents either work in DC or work for companies that, whether they be defense contractors that are based either in our county or neighboring Fairfax County. And the school division, the school district is a large one, serving 82,000 students, fast growing. I'm in my 7th year, and we typically open between 1 and 3 schools a year because of the fast growth. I will say that it's there's strong diversity of opinion on all issues, and the political tension that exists nationally and also specifically as it relates to race issues is just as intense, if not more intense, in Loudoun County. And so 4 years ago, we were cited as like the bellwether county that got a lot of attention in the presidential election. It's historically been a very Republican county, and it's become more Democratic during the last several years, but there remains strong diversity of opinions. And I know we'll be addressing some specific issues, so I'll get into some of the Loudoun County specifics in the context of some of the specific issues we'll discuss this morning.
Yeah, and we've had some questions about that. Hey, address those negative. We're going to get to that, folks. I always have to caution folks when they do this down hall. I don't come into this with a bias either way. I'm not here to support the decision. I'm not here to oppose the decision. As I tell folks, I got to work with whoever's in that chair when this is all said and done. But it is obviously something that's important to our community, and we will ask questions that are important there. Dr. Pot, let me just talk about the process here, folks. You wanted to address that to begin with. And as quick of a as you can without missing details. How was this process handled? Obviously different maybe in some ways because of COVID-19, but how was it similar and dissimilar to previous processes? Obviously you haven't had to do this since 2007 to begin with in Clear Creek ISD, so that's a little different, but how was this process handled?
So the process was a pretty typical superintendent search that any district would go through when they set out to look for a superintendent. I'll hit a couple things along the way where the impact of COVID maybe hit us a little bit, but I think we had ways of getting around that. So the process started all the way back in July when we actually started talking about what we were going to do. And the first decision was that we were going to hire a search firm to help us do that. That when it's as large a district as we are, as high performing a district as we are, there's a lot of factors that make it important to be able to reach out to a firm that has experience and some of the things of going through the entire process along the way. A couple things that were important to us in that choice of, we picked Hazard Young, Attia and Associates as the firm that was going to help us. And one of the things along the way was that we wanted them to be able to have a process to reach out to the community. Because we know that the strength of our district comes from our community, and there's passionate people about education. They care about the education of their children. And as a district, we always pull together committees to work on any big issues that are happening. And a large piece of the search process is putting together what is the profile of a superintendent for us. What are we looking for as a community, as a district? And lots of people had input into that eventually, but we wanted a firm that would be able to pull that input in and work with it. And then another thing that we wanted was a nationwide search, the ability to look across and find the very best across the entire nation. It doesn't always happen that we're looking for the very best, and so we want to be able to go out there and find that. So I'll say another piece of that was that we wanted to make sure that we had a firm that could actually solicit, had a knowledge base of superintendents out there, what was around the country. They had links to those people, and they could actually do some recruiting and talk to people who maybe were not wanting to leave their district at all, were very happy and didn't even know anything about us. But once they saw what this district was, maybe they'd have an interest in coming here. So I'll say that by the time we got to the 6 candidates that the board actually looked at, all of those 6, and you've heard me say before, were sitting superintendents, but also none of them were looking to go find a different job. They were all happy within the places that they were. And I said it the other day yesterday with Dr. Williams. He didn't even know who CCISD was 6 months ago. But now he's learned a lot more about us. So there was that piece of getting the search firm. There was, once we hired the search firm, the first thing we did actually was put together that superintendent profile. And I'll actually say too, that anybody can go onto our website. All of these meetings were open meetings where we talked about the process and everything else happening. So you can go back onto the district website and see all of the meetings and all of the decisions that were made along the way and what was talked about in the process. The point at which it became more of a closed facing process to the public was the point that we actually went into interviews. And I will make a point about the need for confidentiality in the process, and that most of these, well, what the search firm has come back and told me was that none of our top candidates would have actually stayed in the process if they had known that they were going to be, their name was going to get out beforehand. And I think a little bit of that you can see in what's happened with Dr. Williams. If he was not, if we were at the point of maybe only 3 candidates and all the names came out and then all of this social media uproar came out, it impacts their ability to work with their districts themselves, with their boards and what's going on within each of their districts.
Let me ask you about that, because we hear that a lot about, and quite frankly, we hear that, oh, well, you know, the top candidates would not apply for these jobs if they knew their names would be public. Dr. Williams, let me just ask you, would you have applied knowing that up front, that possibly instead of a lone finalist that had been maybe 3-4 names, would you have applied for the job?
I will say that previously in my time period in serving as superintendent, I knew there's a limited number of states where it's a public process, and I wouldn't have considered those. And so with this, while I can't say I definitively absolutely would not have, it would have been unlikely. As soon as I received information out the position and began checking out the district, I was immediately enthusiastic and became increasingly so. But if it had been a public process, I'm not even sure I would have spent the time looking into the district as much as I did to become so excited about the possibility.
Dr. DuPont, I have to ask you this because we hear this a lot, but more and more school districts have found, and colleges, by the way, who have the same protection about privacy. You started out saying that why it had to be. Quite frankly, the law is that it can be, not that it has to be, by the way. I just want people to understand something. The law doesn't require it to be this way. It just gives that it's an option. But more and more school districts and more college districts, for example, when they're hired, they name finalists that go before the public, so the public gets to know them, and then that is to take that process and then tell their board members so they can see that choice, because it comes down to you're naming your CEO, but your stockholders are the taxpayers. And so why is it that, and I understand every single search firm under the sun always says that. It always says, oh, you won't get the top candidates. But there's actually not any proof at all, because we don't see that option taken as often out there. So there's not really anything to balance that through. So why still go through the process this way? And so, because obviously you may, and again, we don't know this either, but you may have been able to avoid a lot of this blowback had there been a process in which, hey, here are our 3 choices that we're considering. In fact, according to the search firm, they had said that on October 20th, they presented 5 to 6, a slate of 5 to 6 to the board, but not from, why from that couldn't you have at least had some type of process? Because more and more districts are doing that now, and it seems to be smoother. You're not having this blowback that you're seeing right now.
Okay, so I'll come back to the job, one of the jobs of the school board. There are 5 main jobs of the school board, which are the elected trustees by the taxpaying community within the district. The 5 main jobs are to address policy within the district, to address budget and set the tax rate, to set the strategic planning for the district, to communicate with the community and provide advocacy. And the 5th job is to hire and evaluate the superintendent. So that is a key job of the school board as defined in code. And so it is the job of the trustees to actually pick that person. You talk about, I said the other night about how do you pull in 96,000 taxpayers? How do you even pull in 30-some thousand that actually vote in the elections and want a voice from that perspective? How do we even, you can't just go out and let them do some vote based even on popular opinion or what's showing on social media.
I'm not saying a vote. I'm not saying a vote. All right, yes, the ultimate decision is the school board. There's no doubt about that. But this is about getting input. It's not saying a vote. No one's suggesting that this goes up for a vote.
Well, and I'll come back to the process the same way, that it's the role of the school board to select that person. The school board is the one that, and that's why I kept coming back to process too. The school board is the one that actually goes through the 6-month-long process, or however long that takes. The school board is the one, those 7 trustees are the ones that actually go through that process and have the information on the superintendent. So there's a lot more information that we get as a board. I stopped at the process of when we actually start interviewing candidates. So when it came to having 6 candidates, it started with a 2-hour-long interview for each of those candidates. And in the times of COVID, that happened to be a Zoom interview. And then that was narrowed down to 3 candidates, and those candidates actually came in. So there's the actual interview process, but then there's all of the background information that each of the trustees do themselves, looking into the candidate and reading the application and going out to their districts and watching school board meetings in their districts and looking at what's going on there. So, and then there's the deliberations that we have actually talking about all those things once we've gone through the entire interview process. Well, it was done at the stage that we had 6, and then it was done at the stage that we had 3. But there's a lot more information that we have going through that process again than anybody in the community has. What our community had, what you're seeing right now, is they had social media attack that came from another district outside of ours, and we're relaying.
Hang on right here, Dr. Bond. It is not just yes, I agree with you. The Virginia folks had come in. It is not just Virginia folks. All right, let's just be fair here. The majority of what's being said are being said by the folks that you represent at Clear Creek ISD. I mean, I don't come into this blindly, ma'am. And I can just say, I'm looking at this, and these are questions, legitimate questions. You had a town hall last night. Dr. Williams did, corresponding with folks last night in the town hall. You had open sessions before. So let's understand. Yes, there are folks right now. In fact, there are folks from Virginia trying to post links. By the way, and I'll explain to folks during lives, the links can't go up on our page. You can go post them somewhere else if you want to. But that's just a function of how we set up during the lives, so that we don't have inappropriate stuff getting appropriate. We're not trying to censor anybody. You can make your comments all you want, by the way. But again, this is about process. And the question I asked you is that you said you got down to the 3 and brought them in. Why not after you've done those interviews? Because it has happened in more and more districts that of just saying, all right, here are our people, get to know them. Then that people can go do their own research, and then they can give you the input that they think, not a vote. And then you at least have from the community. For example, you pointed out the other things that you have to do. When you set policy at the school board, when you set a budget, there are public hearings on that. In this one, the only public process comes in how this process played out was that at the end, it was like, here's our choice. You got 21 days to say something. We haven't yet seen any time, even with this blowback, someone who's named a lone finalist be withdrawn that I know of in the state of Texas, where this was a compromise, by the way, as more and more of the public said, we want to know before you make the final decision. But sometimes it's already baked in on this. And that's, again, I'm asking you as representative of the school board here of why it was that there wasn't, and I'm not going to try to say it wasn't an open process, because I watched the videos as well. There are 3 videos posted in which input was given from the public. And I'm not sure how many people attended those out there, because there's not numbers available. 2 of them on September 9th and 1 on September the 10th, talking about the process, asking folks for input. So it wasn't like there wasn't some input coming in, but why not on the tail end to say, here's our 3 and go forward. Right now, what you're telling me is that those finalists said, we won't do it if you do that. But isn't part of the job, I mean, Greg, I know has to be the guy who stands in front when the public gets upset about something. He said it earlier, superintendents get too much credit and they also get too much blame along the way. But this is a very public position. It is the face of the district. And that's part of the job of the superintendent, is to take that public comment. So why not have that part of the process?
Well, again, I'll go back to the process that we went through, and it coming down to as we did those 3 final interviews and met with each of the candidates that were at that stage, the deliberations that we went through, it was very clear to us that this was the candidate that bubbled to the top from everybody else. And again, I will go back to, this is a decision of the board of trustees. So it lies within our hands to make that decision. I actually would respectfully ask you too, I don't see as many of those, you say that there's a lot of districts that are going to exposing at some stage along the way, more of the people. I actually do not see that happening. And actually in the day that we're in right now, I think it's going to be very hard for the districts that are going through superintendent searches to go through that search, and especially with all of the issues around COVID and race relations and everything else that's happening in the world right now, to have to have those people have their names go out and then realize, their districts realize that they may be looking somewhere else. I think it's going to be an issue. So I would respectfully ask you about that, because I don't think that there is as much of that happening. And I know mainly Texas because I'm here, but that's a separate question too. So
right.
I will come back.
And that's a fair point. And I only know Texas as well because I've covered it.
Right,
Texas,
right.
the ISD, not this last time, but the time before. You know, the selection, that process in which finalists were brought in. College of the Mainland, again, an institution that's allowed to do that, did the same thing when Warren Nichols, before he was hired. And by the way, and pointing out, when my wife was hired there originally, it was an open process, name of 3 finalists. I mean, it's the same concept. And this is about the reason for policy. Yes, you have the choice. There's no doubt about it. And you have that. But for example, when you talked about the budget process and the like, those are all open to public discussions before you make the final decision. And again, I know that technically this isn't the final decision. It's a 21-day period. But again, I understand the points that you're making here, but it's quite obvious. And when you say examples, I'd be more glad to send you the links of that. It is more common. I didn't say it's widespread, but it is more common. And quite frankly, a lot. And I understand the part of the secretive part of things, but the taxpayers, the parents, and the like, obviously, and in the process here, have said otherwise, for the most part, on social media. I don't know if it's really that that much embedded in the community, but you don't get packed board meetings and protests just because everyone's happy. And to blame this on, I mean, the folks, and I know it wasn't a large crowd the other night by comparison of what it could be, but at the same time, it was people in discounting their concerns. So to say, oh, those are Virginia people, ain't no one who showed up. I'm sorry, no one who showed up the other night was from Virginia. So just to be fair here, I don't want to dismiss those that are out there. So again, I asked, so the question that goes to the beginning is explain the process, but also why not? And again, you go back to say, this is what we did, but why was that decision made not to have the finalists?
Well, I'm going back to our process all the time. That's the process that we used.
But again, the question is, why was that the process? It's not what was the process, why was that the process? Particularly
because, okay, well, and I'll go back to trusting our process, because we know the depth of the process and what was included in that and the steps that were in that process, and we trusted the process. We had to go into that trusting our process. And so, and I guess that's why I go back to the process all the time. Gotcha. And trusting the process. I will, even if you go back to even when Dr. Smith came on, that was not an open process either. That was, the school board made that decision. And that was because that is the role of the school board to hire the superintendent. And so I'll come back to that being the piece of it too, is that's our role.
Right. It's also the role of the school board to make the budget and the tax rate. And you have to have a public hearing for those.
You're right. And
make a vote.
You're right. And also, so part of that is, and everything you know that we do in CCISD, we pull the community in, and I said that before, into committees. The place that the public came into this process to inform us in terms of what they wanted was when we reached out to form the profile of the superintendent. Gotcha. So that was a very extensive process that over 1,700 people participated in the survey that went out to find out what were the characteristics that they wanted in a superintendent. And then there were public Zoom meetings where another part of the public participated in that. And so, and that was, I'll go back to, that was part of how we picked the search firm, because we wanted somebody that could pull that public input together, because that is important to us. And that was the place that we got the input from the community. And this is what you want in a superintendent. Now, actually talking with the candidates and figuring out what candidate most closely represents that profile that was developed, that was our job, because that was what we used the process on. And we feel very confident in you know, that we were able to take that profile. And so we took that community input and then we chose the person that best met that.
And Dr. Williams, not to make you feel, I know, you know, it's an uncomfortable position to have everyone kind of talking around you when it's about you, and I totally get that. And Dr. Pott, this is about defending the process. And again, that's why I was asking the question the way it was. This isn't about, it's not about me making that decision or not. As I said, the only reason I bring it, it is a question that's come up. And listen, and the flip side of that is, quite frankly, a lot of times, I tell this to folks many times is too, just because you weren't paying attention doesn't mean the process wasn't open. You know, it wasn't too hard. It took me 5 minutes to find, you know, the other day of everything had been done before that. And I've been somewhat following it anyway, knowing that how the process was going to go. And you wait, quite frankly, until the lone violence made name to come in there. And I think though too, in all fairness to you, Dr. Williams, in that, particularly in the core of Clear Creek ISD in League City, there's been some burns there from folks that got hired for the city manager, for example, in a process in which people felt that they didn't know about the background. I should point out that he was named publicly along with some finalists, and I actually covered the issues that were up beforehand, and they still went ahead and made the decision. And then everyone later said, well, we should have looked into this, and it was. Greg, let me ask you here. I mean, and again, you pointed out, you gave an example, and we don't need to say the exact school district. You gave an example in which we had a similar process of another Texas school district in which kind of the social media campaign had come out, and you said now that superintendent, they won't let her go because of that.
Yeah, so
because you're well connected with the supers across the state.
Right, I am, and I see that a lot where some disparaging remarks come in the process, because you know, being a superintendent means that you've got to make some tough calls, and part of that is you know, sometimes it's you want to take your skill set, you want to move it on to somebody else, but you also have a family to be concerned about. That we do a very good job. We try to make sure that our spouses and our children are well protected. In a position that's, you know, it's a leadership position. You're the chief executive officer of a high-performing school district, which, by the way, has a high-performing school board. And then this process in which the board members are putting in hundreds of hours of research, of culminating all this information. The public cannot even begin to understand the depth and complexity of all the work that goes in by the board. So the process that they utilized is a good quality process. So you don't, it's not a show, it's not a carnival where you're carting around 3 potential people that somebody gets a hold of one negative thing that might have come up as a result of a decision that he or she made. So in the process of this, I think it's a clean process, TJ. It's an honorable process. I even had one person who was a critic of the process get back with me last night and said, Greg, you were right. He said, this man deserves to have a chance. The information that we've been getting from various outlets from Virginia was not telling us the complete story. So he was sold by that conversation that occurred last night, which was a tough sell for this person, because he had politically already formed an opinion for a person that's in a nonpartisan, non-political position.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point there. And I should point out that 2 of the folks that started off that are viewers of ours, who actually asked us early on to have this forum, had reached out to me and have since met Dr. Williams and have said, you know what, my first impressions were wrong. And one of the asked too, because one of the things is when this announcement was made last week, and I promise you, Dr. Williams, we're coming to you here shortly. But you know, one of the things is that and having covered this type of process many times myself, it matters who makes the nomination or who makes the motion. And it matters who's involved, because that is in many times an orchestrated move in there. So I did find it interesting. And that's why I wanted to have him here, is Scott Bowen, who if you listen to how when he campaigned last year running for office, he had said there needs to be more transparency. We need to have more open discussions. That was a big part of his campaign. He was the one that made the motion to hire Dr. Williams. He was the one given the first opportunity to give a public presentation on, this is our guy, this is the best choice out there. And that's why I did ask, and I wish he could have been on with us today to hear him say, and I do have his comments that he made online as well, which I thought were important, and we will bring them up in a little bit here. In fact, let me bring him up now and just take a look, because I found this interesting. Since he couldn't join us here, I was going to ask him about this anyway, but I wanted to take a look at it here. He says, I've been getting a lot of questions about our superintendent finalists. So to be absolutely clear, I never would have voted for a finalist who I thought was going to come in and impose a leftist agenda. In the course of this process, we interviewed dozens of people from both of the districts he led as superintendent. The policies from Loudoun County that are rightly being criticized were passed by their board, and he did his job, which is to execute the priorities and strategies of the board he was looking for. You can read the whole comment there from Scott Bowen, Clear Creek ISD trustee at large there. But I wanted to share that because I did find it interesting, because and Lord, you can talk about, normally, as I say, that is the one part of the orchestrated, like, let's go ahead and go here and do this process, because we do want to show a unified front. Was that the case in this case? Did Scott say, I want to be the one who makes the motion to name Eric Williams the lone finalist, or was that just a random choice at the end? Because it didn't seem a random choice. It seemed like, yes, we've already decided this is what we're going to do.
It wasn't a random choice at the end. The school board has been through this. As we followed through and we came to the point of realizing that we had a lone finalist, it was always 100% behind that. So we have 7 trustees that were all fully behind it. And any one of them would have liked to make that motion too. But I think that Scott making the motion as the newest member of our team, I think it said something about us as a team too, and coming through that, and that we were all together on it, and that we were all very solidly behind it. So that's the perspective I come from.
Right, and there's a 2-part of that process. Not only the newest member of the team, he's an at-large trustee, so he's elected from across the entire district in there. But also too, let's not ignore, as much as we don't want politics to be involved, let's not ignore the politics involved here. He does come from a strong base of folks. Quite frankly, a lot of the local critical folks come from that same base. So he is addressing those when we do so. As I've promised, though, now, Dr. Williams, let's get to you and get into it. Again, I know it's an uneasy point to have everyone in the room talking about you when you're sitting there. So I appreciate you being patient here, but I thought it was important that we get to this point here. So let's dive right in. You talk about there are 2 things that come up with that specifically that I want to give you a chance to address here. And the first being, we're going to bring up the critical race theory. And that's something that Scott addresses there that is controversial, even when it was rumored to be something that the board was going to consider in Clear Creek ISD, which was never a realistic thing. It became an issue on social media. Can you address that, of how it was handled in Loudoun and how you approached that there?
Sure, I will address critical race theory specifically. First, I do want to say is you have no need to be apologetic in terms of whether or not it makes one feel uncomfortable. This is what I want to do, is be able to come and talk directly to you and your viewers, just like I wanted to stand in the same room and speak to residents yesterday. So no problems with that. So I want to quickly give some historical context for race relations in Loudoun County. So with the 1954 Supreme Court decision, Brown v. Board of Education to integrate schools, that resulted in an era of massive resistance in Virginia, and including in Loudoun County, where members of the school board and members of the county board of supervisors talked openly about resisting integration, even spoke of shutting down the schools and providing scholarships to white students to attend whites-only schools. And so it wasn't until after a second federal court order in the late 60s that the Loudoun County Public Schools were integrated. So that's important historical context. And the wounds from that are still felt today. Two examples of indicators of that are one, there have been KKK recruitment flyers found on Martin Luther King Day on the doorsteps of residents in many neighborhoods, including in neighborhoods that are predominantly African American residents. Also, we unacceptably and unfortunately have had incidents of racial slurs in our schools. So those are two examples that provide the sense that there are still issues in Loudoun County. Now, that being said, my role as superintendent is to work with the school board, to work with the broader community, to hopefully have a shared vision to address issues so that there's equal opportunity for all students to succeed and thrive. So let me get to the specifics, though, of critical race theory. And so I'll address two specific examples that people pointed to, saying, hey, look, this is an example of critical race theory. One is the topic of professional learning. And so we had been offering to our teachers opt-in, optional professional learning relating to equity and relating to closing achievement gaps. And of our 12,000 students, 12,000 teachers, we would have typically like 5% participate in any given year. It was our interest as staff to scale that up more slowly. The board said we want to require this of all teachers. So we talked about a multi-year scaling up, and they said, no, we want to do this in 1 year. All 12,000 students participate. We said, hey, we would have to engage outside partners to help us deliver that professional learning. And so that's what we did. And for example, that professional learning included a look at achievement data and look at different outcomes for different student groups. And also the professional learning looked at, okay, how can we support every child so that every child has opportunities to succeed? It was not a critical race theory workshop. Our district has never adopted critical race theory as say, hey, we're embracing this. And the second specific example I want to mention is instructional resources. So some people have pointed to instructional resources from an organization called Teaching Tolerance. But those resources are an optional resource for teachers provided by the state of Virginia. And similarly, within Loudoun County, just as we do for other instructional resources that the state provides, we pass it along to our teachers as an optional resource that they may wish to choose. Now, some people have labeled that critical race theory. Others would say that it doesn't. Is not critical race theory, those resources. For example, it's endorsed by National Geographic as an example of one among other mainstream organizations that endorse that resource. But at the end of the day, it's an optional resource. And I guess the most important thing, even from these details, is for me to state explicitly, I'm not going to bring critical race theory to Clear Creek ISD. Clear Creek ISD is not Loudoun County Public Schools, and Virginia is not Texas. And so I like the fact, I'm impressed by the fact that Clear Creek ISD references inclusivity in its strategic plan. And so, so that is an appropriate focus. And really, I look forward to, as superintendent, I would want to work with the district to sustain the excellence here and to build on that excellence. So it really is not about critical race theory. I've heard the phrase critical race theory more since I was named as sole finalist than I have in my entire life. So I guess that's the comment I would close on in response to this initial question.
Yeah, and it is one of the, because it becomes, and listen, I understand the political ramifications of that, and you pointed that out a little bit as well. It's and I think you've gotten a trial by fire on this, even though you do technically have Texas blood in you, I should point out, is that folks have kind of taken on this approach of, well, he's the carpetbagger coming from Virginia and the policies. There's different things that happen differently. And that goes into the next question of why choose to go from a district of 80,000 students to around 40 or so there. Some may look at that as a step down. The pay thing is different because in Texas, you can make money go a lot farther than you can in Virginia. I know that much from there. So the pay thing's that. But why choose that at this point? And just to kind of out, were you unhappy in Loudoun with the policies and the like, or was this just the next challenge since you said you'd been there for 7 years?
So I'll start with the size issue and then talk about some of the other things that attract me. So I served for 6 years as superintendent in a school district with 12,000 students. And now I'm in my 7th year as superintendent in Loudoun County, serving 82,000. And so for me, 42,000 students is like the sweet spot. It's large enough that it requires a superintendent to think strategically, to think about building capacity, to have metrics in place, create metrics to let us know how we're doing. So all that's very appealing, that it's large enough to have that aspect of the job. But it's also small enough that it's easier for a superintendent to roll up his or her sleeves and really dive into the work, and also to be heavily engaged in the community and to be out and about in the schools. And I love the fact that the superintendent profile emphasizes the importance of community engagement, and that's much more feasible in a district that has 42,000 students. Another aspect of the position of superintendent that I'm attracted to, and you can do this really in any size district, is innovation. Clear Creek ISD is clear about its emphasis in ISD. It's officially a district of innovation in the state of Texas, just like Loudoun County Public Schools is officially a district of innovation in Virginia. But more importantly, as they emphasized in one of their work sessions months ago, they are an innovative district. And so that's attractive to me. And the high expectations of the community, the fact that it's high performing, but people have a, hey, let's not rest on our laurels approach. We need to continuously improve. And both of the districts in which I've served as superintendent, it's been similar, high performing with an expectation for continuous improvement. So all of those things are examples. And I'll just mention two very quickly other attributes. One is the emphasis on thinking strategically. To some, strategic planning may be the most boring phrase ever, put them to sleep, but it's important. It's important to have a plan, to have priorities, to think systematically about how you're going to get to where you want to go. And so the fact that this district approaches its work is compelling to me. And finally, it's the being in Clear Creek ISD specifically. It would be a major honor to be here because it's a high performing district, and then just the area. I think my wife and I, I did not do a drive-by for the interview. It was not a drive-by interview. My wife and I actually came down for 5 days together, and I think we were bugging the trustees it's too much because we kept asking, so like, where should we go to do this? Where is a good place to do this? And so we just really ate up being out and about in the community during that time, and look forward to finding out the best place for a barbecue and the best place to see a sunset. And so we're excited about being here specifically.
You just named two subjects that are going to even be more of a debate than anything else: barbecue and sunset watching here. Because I can tell you right now, the folks in Clear Lake Shores will argue with the people in Nassau Bay over that any day of the week. Being a resident of one of those communities myself, and barbecue, don't get me going there, because it's that's them fighting words at some time out there that comes along the way. You've pointed out too, when you said you'd come on here to learn more about the community. Dr. DuPont had said that before this was opened up, you had not heard of Clear Creek ISD. But when you saw the opportunity, was it something that you discovered and then reached out, or that a search firm? Because a lot of times these search firms have folks that are kind of in their files, so that they reached out to you and said, hey, I think this may be a good fit for you. How did that come about?
So I reached out, a member of the search firm reached out to me, and I hopped online and began checking things out. And then importantly, I watched board meetings. I literally watched dozens of hours of board meetings, and I was really impressed with the governance of the trustees and of the senior leadership that I was able to observe. And I will say, that Dr. Smith sets a high bar. I do have experience following two highly successful superintendents, each of which served in the districts for more than 10 years and were named state superintendent. But not only watching Dr. Smith, but watching his leadership team interact with the board of trustees. And so that's a benefit and something that attracts me in terms of shifting from Loudon here is a harmonious board relations. And so that's another positive.
You get though, and again, and we'll talk a little bit about, and the research I've done has shown that there's been a very vocal critics of you, from a community group there. But do you get the concern when folks hear about things, and in many ways you've come up out of the blue, for them at least, when your name comes up, it's kind of like, oh, because folks think it's baked in, no matter what we say about the 21 day. But do you get the concerns that people have, and how do you plan on addressing those? You have this, obviously. You don't have to be here today. I need to point this out to folks. He is under no requirement. Neither is Dr. DuPont, neither is Dr. Smith, and any requirement to join us here today. I have no power to force y'all to be a part of this. But do you get, how are you going to address that as you go?
So as I mentioned before, kids get one shot at an education, so we need to get this right. Superintendent needs to get things right. The trustees need to get things right. So the selection of a superintendent is the most important job. Like Dr. DuPont mentioned 5, I would say it's the most important job that the trustees do. And so I plan to really focus. So community connections and listening to people would be important throughout my tenure, but particularly the first 90 days is going to be spent listening to people, learning from people, and connecting with people. And so first of all, of course, I'm going to visit every school, see teaching and learning in action, go to sporting events, go to performing arts events, but also hold many community events, listen and learn sessions, and ask the superintendent questions similar to the series of public events that we're holding today and that we held yesterday. And some of them will be general events for parents and community members. Others will be specific groups. So parents of students with disabilities, parents of gifted and talented students. I've already met previously virtually with PTA leaders from throughout the district. But there also would be meetings with other community organizations. I had the opportunity yesterday to meet with chamber and economic development leaders and the CCISD Education Foundation leaders. And I would also be having specific meetings with community groups such as that. But that's really just to establish those relationships, and then would continue throughout my time here. And the other thing, and I joked about the barbecue before and the sunsets, some of it also, part of it, the board asked me for my 90-day, asked me to talk to them about my 90-day interplan, and I literally did say, and take in the best restaurants and things to do in the community, because that's a part of it too, is immediately immersing myself in the community.
And nothing more than that. And I will point out is that that may sound lighthearted, but actually it's where I know in my role, and Greg will tell you this, and so will Laura, is that when we're out and about just in our casual lives, that's where we get a lot of information or a lot of questions from folks out in the community. That's why it takes me 2 hours to shop at HEB. I'm going in for one item because a lot of folks will stop me there and ask questions, and I'm sure you're going to run into that as well.
So for me, the number one place I'm stopped is Costco for some reason. I have great conversations with everybody, but for some reason, it's like Costco is the number one location that I end up chatting with people.
I agree, and it's right there in the school district too. So that's good. So it's convenient for you there. And I want to thank Dr. Smith for sending this over, because we were talking about racial makeups and how to deal with issues. And folks will want to say, oh, we don't have those problems here. But when you look at a district in which it's 46% white, 31% Hispanic, 10% Asian, 8% African American, but it gets down to the fact too that 28% are economically disadvantaged. And many times that is the bigger issue that's being addressed when we hear about racial issues and the like, because that economically disadvantaged actually will hit certain parts. And I think a lot of folks look at, particularly from the outside, will look at Clear Creek ISD and say, oh, that's the high performing, high rich district. And it's not necessarily true when you look at the data. How do you, as superintendent, approach diversity across the board, just as you have it there, to make sure everyone respects everyone, whether it's a teacher respecting students' perspectives, students respecting one another, and students' respecting the views and standpoints of those who educate them?
Were you directing that question to me or
Yes,
Dr.?
sir. Yes, sir, to you. Yeah. Sorry. Greg had provided me the numbers. I'm sorry. Yeah. He's on his way out the door.
I want to be clear, it's not just about the barbecue either. I think that he better get to, we need to get Eric to a Texas football game and a marching band contest and a volleyball playoffs.
Yeah.
You're going to be busy. Just
First
like
Friday in December, I will be at a game. So,
good.
So in terms of, so when I spoke with student leaders in CCISD yesterday, they talked about inclusive in the importance of the existing inclusive environments. And so what I would want to do in CCISD is build on what's happening here. Again, it's not about me bringing any program from Virginia, from Loudoun County here. It is about working with the community members here in CCISD, and I'm impressed with the emphasis on inclusivity. And so that would really be the approach. Also, I like the emphasis on lifting up student voice. I am impressed with the way in which Dr. Smith consults with student leaders, and I would be continuing to do that. But I also think there's a role in lifting up student voice and student leadership and promoting inclusive environments for all students.
And there's a way to do that without getting a certain, it's just an across the board approach. And from what I have been reading, from what your responses have been on these issues, I think we're reading a lot of what people want to define about you. There's no doubt about that. But in reading your responses and what you've said here seems to support what you said. One of the things, obviously, we're seeing a rise in COVID-19 cases in our area as well. I know Virginia is having a tough time, Washington area in particular. But here we're seeing a rise to the point, for example, we had to point out today that a popular festival in our region, Dickens on the Strand, which had already modified because of COVID-19, has decided to cancel. The Ironman triathlon canceled as well. It was happening this weekend. We're seeing more and more of those public events. We're doing those. And I go back to the one expert that I do rely on this, and I think a lot of our viewers do too, Dr. Philip Kaiser, who is the Galveston County Health Authority. And most of the districts, while it touches Harris County, a lot of the districts in Galveston County, and he rates the districts around this area, says they're all doing a pretty good job. That when you do see a COVID outbreak or someone with COVID within a district, it's almost always because it was from outside the district. And then they test positive from there. What is your approach? Because there's one of the allegations is you're going to come in and you're going to shut down the district right away because of COVID. That and Greg and Laura will tell you that was, the delay and start, and they took a lot of heat. This is nothing, I can tell you, compared to what they took over the summer and the first part of the fall. But what is your approach on how the decision will be made on staying virtual, going total virtual, and how the district reacts to COVID?
So CCISD has stated clearly that it has no plans to close its schools, and if any such decisions were made or there was a pausing on in-person learning, that's going to be based on directives from public health officials and from the governor. And so that's exactly what the approach would be that I would take, is to continue the current CCISD approach. I'm not coming in and closing the schools under any other conditions. And again, it's important to recognize that the approach that CCISD wants to take it's different. CCISD is not Loudoun County Public Schools. Texas is not Virginia. And so, and I know that. So one thing I will share is in Loudoun County, I have continually emphasized that a key metric that needs to be considered is the transmission rate within schools. So even as rates have risen within the community, generally, I've encouraged our board in decision making to focus on transmission within schools, which has been relatively low. And so just earlier this week, on Tuesday evening, we had a board meeting, and I set forth we had been sharing all along that decisions would be based, as local health officials have recommended, on a variety of data. And the board was interested in conversations to tie closure decisions to very specific metrics, that if it reaches this level in the community, then schools would close. And my recommendation to the board was to instead take that automatic approach, is to take a more cautious approach, as recommended by health officials, to look at all the data, including whether or not there's transmission within the schools. And there's been very limited, because of our great public health mitigation implementation, there's been very limited transmission. So at the end of the meeting, though, on Tuesday, by a narrow vote, the school board in Loudoun County did not accept the recommended measure I did, but instead chose to implement automatic triggers for shutting down in-person learning. So as is our case, I had provided 2 alternative motions reflecting the alternative viewpoints of board members and the broader community. And so at the end of the day, on Tuesday evening, the school board went with automatic triggers. That is not what I had recommended. And I mentioned the diversity of opinion within the school board in Loudoun County. That reflects the diversity of opinion within the broader Loudoun County. And I'm told that that's more similar to what existed within CCISD this summer, and that's not the case now. So again, I'll close with Loudoun County and the decisions they are made within the context there. Loudoun County is not CCISD, and I'm not coming in and shutting down the schools. In fact, I think it's great the approach that CCISD has taken with its in-person learning combined with an option for parents who want it for in-person learning.
Right, and I think you said a key point I'd like to have you repeat that, is that you made a recommendation about being more isolated, not have automatic triggers, abroad, just kind of we're going to do this just because it hits this number. You're going to make decisions. You had recommended to the Loudoun officials to make decisions based on what's on the ground and what's happening within isolated areas, which is similar, quite frankly, to what the Clear Creek ISD approach is. And the board rejected that, not outright, but in a narrow vote.
Right, and in fact, because if I recall correctly, there were at least 3, perhaps 4 board members who supported the motion I had recommended out of 9, but it was not a majority. And again, that the varying perceptions within the board is just reflecting the varying perceptions within Loudoun County, which you also see playing out within the Northern Virginia area. So we're the 3rd largest district in Virginia. The largest district next door, Fairfax County, has had a slower implementation of in-person learning than we have. And so that also just provides context for what community expectations are.
One of the things to talk about, particularly, you had mentioned earlier about a meeting with folks that have specific interests within the district, particularly special needs parents, which is something that Clear Creek ISD, other districts have wrestled with for years, and getting the right policy in place. What is your approach? Because that was a voice that that was probably the loudest when we're talking about delay in education, because that does, if you have a special needs child, that in-person learning is so much more important than it would be. And the district had set it up to phase in quicker for that. What's your approach to special needs education within a district?
So I'll speak very briefly about that in the context of the pandemic, but then speak more broadly. So in the context of the pandemic, we've prioritized bringing back our neediest students with disabilities for in-person learning sooner than other students. But speaking more broadly, it is so important working to support the success of all students and providing additional supports as needed, including for students with disabilities. And so I'm particularly proud of our work a few years ago in implementing a specialized reading initiative, and that has led to improved reading scores for students with disabilities participating in this program, particularly in those schools that had instructional coaches to support the teachers implementing that. We also have taken measures at the district level to improve the consistency of implementation of best practices, because one thing we've heard a lot from parents is, hey, we're glad that the recommended practice or the best practice identified by the district is X, Y, and Z. But unfortunately, only 2/3 of the schools are doing X, Y, and Z. So we've worked to scale up more consistent implementation. The last thing I'll mention about serving students with disabilities, I'm proud that we've significantly enriched the staffing standards or the ratios that we use to identify how many teachers and teacher assistants will be hired to work with those students. And so we've seen a net increase. Now, because we were standardizing the implementation of those staffing standards, there were a small number of schools that had a net decrease, but the overall net increase for the district has been a significant increase, and so we're proud of that.
Gotcha. This is a big question here to ask, because it's in broad, but it also kind of defines someone. What is your educational philosophy as the CEO for our area, the largest district in our coverage area?
So I am really attracted to the fact that CCISD does not want to just have a test prep mentality. And CCISD has been a leader in the state in terms of saying, hey, yes, tests play an important role. Yes, there's a role for accountability, but that shouldn't be the focus. That's not a high enough bar for our students. And so similarly, my philosophy is about promoting the joy of teaching and learning. And that's really what Mrs. Green was all about, that captured my interest, inspired me. It's about the joy of teaching and learning. We need to empower students to return to the instructional approaches that they know work. Teachers didn't go into education to say, hey, I want to get kids ready for a paper and pencil test. And kids don't hop off the bus at the end of the day handing up a Scantron sheet from multiple choice that, look, Mom and Dad, I'm proud of this work. So my philosophy really is about promoting the joy of teaching and learning rather than a test prep mentality.
Gotcha. And we've meant to keep this within an hour. I'm sorry we've gone long. I know you're trying to get back and get back with your wife. We are glad to hear before you came on the air today that you had spent some time to get to know the community. And we do welcome you back at any time, Dr. Williams, to discuss this as we get closer. Should point out, Dr. DuPont did noted that December 1st is that 21-day deadline for the final decision there. Dr. Pont, the way I know you're taking a lot of heat on some things, but Laura made us ask you at this point, the school board seems unified and comfortable with this decision. So this is kind of a two-part question that I would take it even after this, that's still the case. Second is, you said he bubbled up to the top. How close was the number 2?
Not very close. It was a very clear, very clear separation between him and yes, the trustees have not changed as a body the opinion at all. In fact, we were looking very forward to him being able to come here and actually talk to people, because we knew that once he started talking to people and making those relationships and communicating, that people were going to realize what was really happening about it. So I do want to take the opportunity. Actually, the reason that we need to close up from our end is that there's another group of community meetings today. And I think the first one is scheduled to start around 10:30. So he's going to be here for 3 or 4 more meetings today, meeting with people. And I do want to take the opportunity to thank the entire community who were involved in the process along the way, and for wanting to be more involved along the way. I really think that this speaks to who CCISD is, because that input is always there, and we want that community input. That's what makes our district so good, is that there's so many passionate people out there talking about education and wanting it to be good. So I really do appreciate the input, and I appreciate the people that came and have been came yesterday, because we had meetings throughout the day. And so there was a lot of opportunity. A lot of people were able to come here and actually talk to him. And I appreciate that people come in and, they may not be coming in with an open mind, but they listened. And I think Dr. Williams has been able to answer their questions and talk to them. So I do really just want to thank the community, though. It's not we're not trying to keep out input. I have my 2-hour meetings in HEB too, and in other places, and it's a good thing. That's what makes us better. So.
Dr. Williams, not that we're all going to favor HEB, but that is a Texas grocery store. Just so I know you know it, but but just to give you a chance there. Greg, I do appreciate. By the way, Greg Smith has been communicating as well with our viewers in the forum here as well throughout this as well. And before I give Dr. Williams the last chance, Greg, do you have anything else you want to add to this?
No, I just want to thank the board. I think this is a great case that tests its mettle. Just like any great team, and I appreciate the strength. I appreciate them listening and the character that they bring to the table. Also, hope that our community gives Dr. Williams a chance, just like I'm going to go back to the superintendents that I knew, Dr. McLeod, Dr. Wilson, Dr. Mossman, and then me, that we were all given a chance to prove ourselves, knowing full well that every day when we walk in, we have to defend our existence. So having said that, I'm proud of board's their selection, and I think Dr. Williams will be a great superintendent, probably an upgrade. And every carpet needs a good upgrade every now and then. So
I'm not so sure we're going to call you a carpet, but in there and all. So thank y'all for being on. Dr. Williams, let me give you a final say for the community here. Whatever you want to say to them.
So I will just say I am so humbled by the amazing things happening in CCISD, and it truly would be an honor to serve as superintendent here. And you may have heard me say in the announcement, talk about my daughter telling me when I became superintendent of a high-performing district, don't mess it up, Dad. And I'm certainly coming in with a sense of don't mess it up here, but it's also much higher standard than that in terms of how we're going to build on the excellence. So I'm excited about that. So thank you. And on a personal note, did I understand you, TJ, to say that you're a UT guy?
I am. Yes.
So I mentioned I enjoyed trash talking with Mrs. Green, and so because my grandfather taught at Texas A&M, maybe we can eventually engage in some trash talking.
Oh, great! Then Greg, you can leave that outhouse that's in your office to him. That A&M outhouse. Yeah, there it is, in the upper right-hand corner for there. As I'd say, Greg and I are good friends. We go to the same church, and I admire him a great deal, obviously, and he always allows me. I MC a lot of events in the community, and he allows me to give him a good ribbing about the Aggies all the time. And I should point out, my brother's an Aggie. As I said, if you're a Sooner, we got a whole different issue going on.
Your material's running a little bit low this year.
I know,
TJ.
yeah. Well, that's why I needed to change. I need to have somebody else come in so I can work on them for a little while. I've had too many years working around 2007 till now to come along the way. So I appreciate it. And we'll be talking to Greg too before he actually gets out the door. There, and I say get out the door. You're not leaving the community. You're still going to be living here. You're going to just spend grandpa time. I know. Dr. Williams, thanks for coming on. By the way, too, folks, if you want to find out a little bit more, obviously we didn't get to every single question that folks may have wanted us to go to here. We got to the top ones that our viewers had already sent to us, but also should point out that a lot of the questions that viewers were asking here got on. If you go to the Clear Creek ISD school web page, you can find the CCISD Superintendent search. You have the board workshop meeting that happened November 9th, as you see there on where the announcement was made. But there's also individual videos, everything from the statement from Dr. DuPont, the search timeline of how that was handled along the way. And there's also individual question and answer sessions with Dr. Williams. Some of the questions we asked here, some different as well, and they're broken down individually, so you don't have to go scrolling through the whole thing to take advantage of that. So it's another piece of information. The board doesn't make its final decision until the 1st of December to come in there. Dr. Williams, thanks again for coming on with us. We appreciate your time. Dr. Greg Smith, Superintendent, Clear Creek ISD, Dr. Laura DuPont, President of the School Board. Sorry to hold you up for your other meetings or more community meetings there, encouraging folks to participate in those as well. Thank you all for watching. I'm TJ Aulds, i45Now.